She went to a work dinner without him and now her boyfriend won't let it go. Was she wrong? Her boyfriend was sitting at home, completely fine, while she was at a casual work dinner with her coworkers. He was not sick. He was not in crisis. He was not waiting for her at a hospital or stranded somewhere needing her help. He was simply home, comfortable, and still, somehow that was the problem. That was the emergency that needed to be addressed right now, in real time, in the middle of her trying to build actual human connections at a brand new job. The tension in that relationship was already humming underneath the surface long before she ever walked through the restaurant door. You could feel it in the way the story was told, the careful phrasing, the exhausted tone of someone who has already had this conversation too many times and knows she is going to have it again before the night is over. And the thing is, she had done everything right. She tried to bring him. She asked the host ahead of time, not as an afterthought but as a genuine effort to make her boyfriend feel included and considered. She was told no partners, full stop, which applied to every single person at that gathering, not just her boyfriend, every couple, every significant other, no exceptions made for anyone. She went back to her boyfriend and told him exactly what happened, explained the rule, explained that it was not personal. And still, somehow, this became a whole thing. That is the part that lingers. Not the rule, not the dinner, but the fact that doing everything right was still not enough to prevent the fallout. Picture this. You are 23 years old, you are new at a job, and you are finally starting to feel like you belong somewhere. You spent the first few weeks learning names and figuring out the rhythms of a new office, smiling at people in the hallway and hoping it would eventually turn into something real. And now it is. People are inviting you out. They like you. They want you around the table, literally. They are choosing to spend a Tuesday evening with you because they enjoy your company, and that feeling, that small but meaningful feeling of social belonging, is something you have been quietly hoping for. And in the same breath, the person who is supposed to be in your corner is making you feel guilty for simply showing up to dinner with the people you work with. Not for doing anything wrong. Not for hiding anything. Just for going. That is the situation she was living in, and it is worth taking seriously, because the cost of that guilt compounds quickly in a young person who is still figuring out who she is and where she fits. Her boyfriend made his feelings very clear from the moment the first work party came up. He was upset that partners were not invited. He pressed her on how she would feel if the roles were reversed. You could imagine the conversation, the way it probably circled back on itself, him asking the question and then not quite accepting the answer, testing her response to see if it would reveal something she was not saying out loud. And she answered him honestly. She said she would not have minded because she trusts him. She understands that socializing with work people matters. It is part of building a career, part of being a person in the world who has relationships and obligations and a life that does not begin and end with a romantic partner. That answer, that completely reasonable and emotionally mature answer, did not seem to land with him at all. He just kept going, kept pushing, kept returning to the discomfort as though her reassurance had no weight. Here is something important to note about that first party. She did not even attend it. She had a separate commitment that evening, a dinner for a close friend who was moving away, and she honored that instead without hesitation. She chose to show up for that friendship, to mark that moment, to be present for someone who needed her there. And in doing so she missed the work event entirely. She was not out with coworkers that night. She was not at the party her boyfriend was so troubled by. She was at a quiet goodbye dinner for someone she cared about. So the first work party was not even a point of real conflict in terms of what she actually did. There was no moment where he had to sit home alone imagining her laughing at a table full of colleagues. The night passed without incident. And yet the invitation alone, the mere fact that such a party had existed and that partners had not been included, was enough to plant something anxious and unresolved inside him. He was troubled not by anything that happened but by something he imagined, which already tells you something significant about where his head was at and what was driving this. Now the second invitation comes around. Casual dinner and trivia with work friends. Low stakes, low drama. The kind of evening where people split appetizers and argue cheerfully about geography questions and go home by 10. The kind of evening she might describe to him later with a laugh about a question nobody got right. Nothing remotely scandalous about it, nothing that would raise an eyebrow from any reasonable observer. She tells him about it ahead of time, which is exactly the kind of open communication a good partner maintains. She is not hiding anything. She is not sneaking around or keeping her plans vague. She is being transparent and respectful, treating him like someone who deserves to know her plans and be part of her life even when he is not physically present in it. And in return for that honesty, for that consideration, she is getting anxiety and guilt and low-level pressure from someone who should be supportive, who should be saying have a great time and maybe texting her a silly trivia question from home just to make her smile across the table. The host of the first party is going to this dinner too. That is the detail that seems to be sending her boyfriend over the edge, the piece of information that transformed an ordinary outing into something charged and complicated. He does not like this guy, specifically and solely because this guy was the one who communicated the no partners rule at the last event. Which is a genuinely strange thing to hold against someone. Think about what that actually means. A coworker planned a work gathering, made a decision to keep it to coworkers only, and communicated that boundary evenly and without cruelty to everyone involved. He did not single her out. He did not make an exception that excluded her boyfriend while welcoming everyone else. The rule was the same for the entire group. The host of a party is allowed to set the guest list. That is not a betrayal. That is not something that warrants resentment. That is just how hosting works, and most people understand that without needing it explained. But in her boyfriend's mind, this guy has become something else entirely, a symbol of threat, a convenient target for discomfort that does not really have anywhere else to go. It is easier to dislike the host than to sit with the fact that what is really happening here has nothing to do with the host at all. What her boyfriend seems to be communicating, whether he realizes it or not, is that he does not fully trust her. Not her judgment. Not her loyalty. Not her ability to be around other people, including men, without something going wrong. And the troubling part is that she has given him zero reason not to trust her. She has been transparent every step of the way. She tried to include him. She reassured him. She explained the situation with patience and honesty. She even described the dinner to him in full detail so he would understand it was just a casual work hangout, not a party, not a bar crawl, just dinner and trivia. None of that was enough, because the issue was never really about information. It was about something he was carrying that her words could not reach. She wrote in her post that it feels like a moral dilemma, that going means doing something wrong by him, and not going means slowly losing her place in her own workplace friendships. And that framing, the fact that she is experiencing it as a moral dilemma at all, is itself the clearest sign that something is off. Going to a casual work dinner with colleagues should not feel like a moral dilemma. It should feel like a Wednesday evening plan, maybe a little tiring after a long day, but not something that requires her to weigh her own integrity. That dilemma exists because her boyfriend has put it there, has loaded this completely normal situation with so much emotional weight that she cannot see clearly anymore, cannot simply look at the invitation and say yes without a wave of anticipatory dread about what waits for her when she gets home. This is what happens when one partner in a relationship has an anxiety response to the other partner simply having a social life. It does not always look like control at first. Sometimes it looks like hurt feelings. Sometimes it looks like a boyfriend saying he just wants to talk about it, just wants to understand, just needs a little more reassurance. And the person on the receiving end, because they love this person and do not want them to feel bad, keeps reassuring, keeps explaining, keeps offering their schedule and their reasoning and their emotional energy in an attempt to smooth things over. But slowly, without anyone necessarily intending it, the person doing all that reassuring starts shrinking. Starts calculating. Starts asking themselves whether dinner with coworkers is worth the fallout at home. She is 23. She is new to this job. She said herself that these work friendships mean something to her and that she does not want to isolate herself. That instinct is completely healthy and correct. Human beings need community outside of their romantic relationship. They need friends, colleagues, people who know them in a different context, who see different sides of them. That is not a threat to a relationship. That is what makes a person whole, what gives them something to bring back to the relationship rather than slowly hollowing out into someone who only exists in relation to their partner. The fact that she ended up in the comment section of a Reddit post asking strangers whether she was wrong for going to a work dinner tells you everything you need to know about the effect this dynamic is having on her. She knows the answer. You can feel it in the way she wrote her post, careful and slightly defensive, like someone who has already argued with herself about this and lost. Somewhere inside her she absolutely knows that going to trivia night with colleagues is fine, normal, not even a question. But her boyfriend has made her second-guess herself so thoroughly, has repeated his discomfort so consistently, that she needed outside confirmation just to feel okay about a Tuesday night dinner with people she works with. That is not a small thing. That is the gradual erosion of someone's confidence in her own very reasonable judgment. Her boyfriend comparing his all-male industry to her mixed-gender workplace is also worth unpacking. He asked her how she would feel if she were in his position. But his position involves going to a work event with no partners and a host who set a reasonable boundary. There is nothing in that scenario that should cause alarm. The implication underneath that question is that working with men creates some kind of inherent risk, that her being around male coworkers is something that requires management and monitoring and ongoing reassurance. That is not a healthy way to think about your partner. That framing treats her not as a trustworthy adult with her own moral compass but as someone whose proximity to other men is itself a problem to be solved. She is not the asshole. Not even slightly. She tried to include him. She was honest with him. She communicated every step of the way. She reassured him with patience she probably did not even fully feel by that point. And she went to dinner with her coworkers like a normal adult human being who has a life outside of her relationship and who deserves to enjoy it without guilt. Every single one of those things was the right call. The verdict here is clear and it needs to be said without softening. Her boyfriend does not have a jealousy problem. He has a trust problem. And the difference matters enormously, because jealousy can be worked through with communication and reassurance, and she has already done all of that. She has put in the emotional labor that is supposed to move the needle. Trust issues that persist even after full transparency and honest conversation are a different beast entirely. They do not go away because your partner explains themselves well. They do not dissolve in the warmth of a good conversation. They go away when the person who has them decides to do the internal work, to examine where the fear actually comes from, and to stop making their partner responsible for managing it. She needs to pay attention to the pattern here. It started with a work party where she could not even bring him, escalated to him developing a specific dislike for a coworker whose only offense was setting a guest list, and has now landed on her feeling genuinely conflicted about going to trivia night with people she shares a workplace with. That is a trajectory. Each point on that line sits a little further from reasonable than the last. And trajectories like this do not tend to reverse themselves on their own without someone choosing to do something different. The most important thing she can do right now is not to win the argument with her boyfriend about this specific dinner. It is to ask herself whether the emotional labor of constantly managing his discomfort, constantly justifying her social life, constantly reassuring him that a casual dinner is not a betrayal, is something she wants to be doing at 23, 1 year into a relationship. Because if this is what 1 year looks like, she deserves to take that question seriously. She called him his dead name at Mother's Day dinner, so he got up and walked out forever. He walked into that restaurant with a gift in his hand and hope in his chest. He had dressed up. He had told himself it was going to be quick and easy. He had decided, one more time, to try. And within the same meal, his mother looked at him and called him by a name that no longer belongs to him. A name he has spent years leaving behind. And she did it knowing exactly what she was doing. That moment, the dead name at the dinner table was not an accident. It was not a slip. This woman has had over a year to learn. He has been out for more than a year. He has been on testosterone for 10 months. There has been no ambiguity, no confusion, no period where she might have been figuring things out. She simply chose, repeatedly and consistently, not to do the one small thing that would have told her own child that he matters to her. Not once. Not his name. Not his pronouns. Not a single time. Let that sit for a second. Before they even got to the dead name, the dinner had already started going sideways over something that reveals a lot about who this mother is. His roommate and best friend is entitled to financial support from her father while she is still in school. This is not controversial. This is how the law works in their country. And his mother had opinions about it, negative ones, in the direction of the father rather than the young woman who simply needs help. Picture the scene. A dinner table that was supposed to be a celebration, candles maybe, a menu he probably looked at ahead of time, a gift sitting near his chair that he had picked out with care. And instead of warmth, the first thing he has to navigate is his mother lobbying on behalf of a man who is withholding money from a college student. Given that this same mother kicked her own child out at 18 and has not financially supported him in any meaningful way since, the position she took at that table is not surprising. But it is revealing. It tells you everything about who she instinctively sides with, who she thinks deserves comfort, and who she expects to simply manage on their own. He tried to shut that conversation down. He did not escalate. He did not match her energy. He tried to redirect and move on. Think about what that took. He sat across from someone who was already, within the first few minutes of the meal, making choices that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with her own need to voice opinions. He swallowed that. He tried to steer towards something neutral, something that might salvage the evening. She would not let it go. So by the time the dead name came out of her mouth, this was not the first uncomfortable moment of the meal. It was the culmination of an evening where she had already made clear whose comfort she was prioritizing, and it was not his. Her response when he pointed out the name was genuinely breathtaking in its cruelty. She told him she would use his chosen name when he changed it on his identification documents. She knows he cannot do that right now. He works with people who are openly transphobic and homophobic, and being outed at work carries real consequences for his safety and livelihood. She knows this. She used it anyway, as a condition. As if his right to be called by his own name is something he has to legally earn before she will extend it to him. As if love comes with a documentation requirement. As if a mother saying her child's name correctly is a reward to be unlocked rather than the bare minimum that any decent person would offer without being asked. The audacity is actually staggering on this one. Her framing was essentially this. I will acknowledge who you are when a government document tells me I have to. Until then, I get to decide what to call you. And she said this to her own child, at a Mother's Day dinner, after he showed up with a gift and dressed nicely and tried, one more time, to make things work. She looked at all of that effort, at the visual evidence that he still wanted her in his life, and she responded by telling him he had not yet met her conditions for basic respect. There is something almost calculated about that response. It is not the answer of someone who is confused or struggling. It is the answer of someone who had a ready justification prepared, who knew exactly which lever to pull to make him feel like the obstacle in his own life. She handed him a condition she knew he could not currently meet and then sat back as though she had been perfectly reasonable. What makes this even more painful to sit with is the backstory he shared. She calls herself an ally. She has told people she accepts everyone. She reacted negatively when he came out as bisexual. She reacted negatively when he had a girlfriend. She reacted negatively when he came out as trans. The pattern is undeniable. She is perfectly comfortable with being an ally in the abstract, as long as the person who needs her support is someone else's child. The moment it is her own kid standing in front of her, asking not for money or grand gestures but simply to be called by his name, the acceptance evaporates. The bumper sticker politics dissolve. What is left underneath is someone who has never once chosen him when it cost her anything at all. He stood up from that table and told her she has no daughter and no son in him anymore. That line is striking and it deserves to be heard clearly. He did not say he needed space. He did not say he was upset and would call her later. He named exactly what had happened. She had made it clear, through years of behavior and through the events of that exact evening, that she does not consider him her child in any real and meaningful way. So he named the reality that already existed. He did not create it. He simply finally said it out loud. And saying it out loud, in a restaurant, in front of whatever other diners happened to be nearby, probably felt terrifying and necessary in equal measure. That is not a scene. That is a person refusing to pretend anymore. His father picked him up. They went to his boyfriend's house. He had a healing conversation with someone who actually shows up for him. And that contrast, between the mother who demands effort from him while giving nothing, and the father who drove across town without hesitation and sat with him through the hard parts, is the clearest possible picture of what he actually needs in his life and what he can let go of. Think about what his father driving across town actually meant in that moment. No lecture. No asking him to consider her side. Just a car pulling up and a door opening and someone saying, without words, I am here and you matter. That is what love that requires nothing in return actually looks like in practice. He has it. It just does not come from the direction he kept hoping it would. He asked whether he should apologize for making a scene. The answer is no. The scene was not the problem. The scene was a response to years of a problem. The scene was one moment of finally refusing to absorb something that should never have been directed at him in the first place. An apology would suggest that his reaction was disproportionate, and it was not. It was the first completely honest thing that had happened at that table all evening. And beyond that, an apology would reframe the entire evening in a way that lets her off the hook. It would turn a story about a mother who refused to say her child's name into a story about a child who caused a disturbance at dinner. That reframing is exactly what she would want. He should not give it to her. He mentioned he is already in therapy and already working through everything related to her. That matters. It means this is not an impulsive person who blows up over small things. It means he has been doing the work, carrying the weight, processing the damage, and still showing up to try. He has been trying for years. He got dressed up and brought her a gift on the day that is supposed to celebrate her. He walked in with hope, which is perhaps the most quietly devastating detail in this entire story, because hope after repeated disappointment is not naivety. It is exhausting, deliberate, generous. And she used that day, that hope, that effort, to call him by a name she knows causes him pain. The closing argument here is simple. He does not owe her another attempt. He does not owe her an apology. He does not owe her the performance of being her child while she refuses to acknowledge who he actually is. The relationship as she has designed it requires him to absorb everything and ask for nothing, to make her comfortable at the cost of his own well-being, to be endlessly patient with someone who has never once extended that patience back to him. That is not a relationship. That is a dynamic that serves only one person, and it has never been him. He walked out of that restaurant and into a version of his life where the people who love him actually show it. His father drove to get him. His boyfriend held space for him. Those people are his family. The woman at the table who could not say his name is not, regardless of biology. He did not lose a mother when he walked out of that restaurant. He finally stopped pretending he had one. Drop a comment below and tell me which story hit harder for you. I genuinely cannot decide. And if this video got you, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot. It really does help more than you know.